Love them or hate them, the impact of Richard Mille on the watch world these past few decades is undeniable. And while they might not work with my wardrobe, it's incredibly important we understand what wider movements and ideas the overly complicated, maybe even ugly watch brand plays into, and thus why they deserve a bit more attention, and I think the title of the most important watch of the 21st century. Welcome to Doug's Watches, the thinking watch channel, where I like to think about art, design, history, theory, philosophy, and how they all relate to the world of watches. And if that sounds good to you, do make sure to like and subscribe. So to evoke the great Charlie XCX, we need to go back to 1999 and ask ourselves what is going on in the watch world. Tag Heuer are a cool watch worn by the entire F1 paddock. Rolex are producing 5-digit references. The Patek Philippe Aquanaut has been on the market for just 2 years. It's a different era, one where watches aren't so sure of what they are. We bring it up time and time again, but the Seiko Astron is to blame for this. 1969's quartz wristwatch that triggered the quartz crisis, or revolution depending on who you ask. Now Watch YouTube largely portrays this as a rather short affair. Seiko launched the Astron, Genta pens the Royal Oak, and we all move on with our lives. But this wasn't the case. It was a much more drawn out period, with some brands adapting, some brands going all in on quartz, and others picking mechanical as the only option and working to craft it as a luxury focused product. Then others like Omega and Tag Heuer were sitting on the fence, producing both mechanical and quartz offerings. But by 1999 this had all changed. The mechanical watch was establishing itself quite clearly as the luxury option, and I think that is clearly marked by one new technology: the Omega coaxial escapement, a far more reliable escapement type that requires less lubrication thanks to its pushing motion as opposed to the sliding motion of the more traditional and at this point widespread Swiss lever escapement. Now this movement gets popular fast, and combined with a cool factor thanks to its appearance in the Seamaster 300-meter on Bond's wrist, becomes a smash hit for Omega, elevating the brand from their quartz crisis milieu, where the brand felt a bit lost, just printing Seamaster on the dial of anything and launching weird and ugly speedies left, right and centre. But the coaxial escapement's impact on the wider watch industry can be surmised in a couple of words: new technological innovation equals cool. And two men were listening to this: Richard Mille and his business partner Dominique Ginat. Richard Mille himself is an interesting man. He was not a watchmaker by trade but a marketeer, something important to the entire brand. In the 70s, Mille worked at Finhor, a company bought this watchmaker, Matra, who were a parent company of many French brands, including a name in watches that you'll likely know today, Yema. When Matra sold their watch brands to Seiko in 1992, Richard Mille left to work at Mauboussin, a jeweler who wanted to build a watchmaking empire and needed an experienced manager to lead the way. But it's in this time where he begins hatching his plans for a watch carrying his name, which he presents to Dominique Ginat in 1998. The two secure partnerships with major names in the Swiss watch world. First, Montre Valgine, a name you might not know, but one you most certainly do, Audemars Piguet. To this day, AP are a minority stakeholder in Richard Mille with a 10% share, which might seem illogical, as after all, surely both are gunning for that billionaire watch owner market. But we'll return to this later. However, by 2001, the brand was ready for their first launch, the RM001 Tourbillon, a 17-piece run with a skeletonized movement, tonneau-shaped case, and this futuristic yet brutalist aesthetic. And it worked, establishing the brand as one of the elite watchmakers to own. See, this first watch is groundbreaking, sure, but it also wasn't at the same time. The tonneau case, that's Cartier-coded. The skeleton movement, watchmakers like Breguet had been doing that for years. The tourbillon, well, that's an age-old complication. But with AP's stamp of approval, a new look that's a distortion of classic luxury fused with the aesthetic of the integrated bracelet sports watch and a FOMO-baiting short run, Richard Mille made themselves a force to be reckoned with. They followed this up with the 002 V1 Tourbillon, then the 003 V1 Tourbillon Dual Time, then a split-second chronograph, the 005, the 007, the 009, the first Formula One partnership, and we wouldn't see a new case shape till the 016 automatic extra flat in 2007. We'd see our first round watch from the brand in 2009 with the RM025. The 035 would bring in Rafa Nadal as a brand ambassador in 2011. The 053 would look like something from MB&F. The 055 Bubba Watson, well, that's their first departure into golf. We'd of course see partnerships with the Jamaican sprint team, so Johan Blake and Shelley Ann Fraser-Price. More F1 watches with pieces for both Ferrari, McLaren, and the often forgotten Lotus F1 team, as well as more mainstream celebrities like Jackie Chan and Pharrell Williams. Richard Mille understood the three things to build a great watch brand that people wanted and that the rich would actually buy. Watching Omega's rise, they understood the importance of genuine innovation. So they would build ultralight watches from carbon nanofibres and titanium. They'd invent laminated sapphire crystal, create new complications like the mechanical G-force sensor and whatever the RM069 erotic tourbillon is. They understood that their watches needed mass market recognition as an item of wealth. They couldn't be quietly luxurious like Longa, so they needed a distinct case silhouette that could be clocked from across the room, identifiable design motifs in the dial and strap, and of course, wrist presence that shouts, "I'm a success." But more so than this, they needed to be recognizable as an item of the wealthy, not something one is introduced to by your old money friends in the know. So they had to be put on the wrists of those in the wealthy world, celebrities, Formula One, and golf, the mass market visibly rich. And that's why they've become as important in the world of watches as your old-fashioned brands, so Rolex, Patek, AP, Vacheron, who've taken the time to slowly curate this image. However, RM also needed one major thing to establish their status as the most important watch brand of the 21st century: to appear like a major progression of watches. So what am I talking about here? A progression of watches? Richard Mille did not invent the tonneau case. They did not invent influencer marketing, nor did they create the category of futuristic haute horology watches. Bear with me one moment though, we're going to talk about art history. So art has gone through different phases, eras. You can break this down to very intricate categories, but if you think Renaissance, Baroque, Neoclassical, Romantic, Modern, and then Contemporary, you can break each of these categories down to the nth degree as well, so Pre-Raphaelites, Impressionism, Art Nouveau, Cubism, the list can go on forever. But for the purposes of today, we need to think about modernism in a bit of a broader stroke. And what modernist movements like Dada, Suprematism, and Post-Impressionism did is break down the established form of what came before them and made art that represented the world that they saw. They enacted the ethos of the poet T.S. Eliot, that modernist art needs to make it new. But this is not what Richard Mille have done. Gerald Genta did this. His designs progressed the classical dress and expensive watch into something that represented modern society. It was less ornate, harsher, more industrial and less polished, like many a modern artistic movement aiming to do something new. Now we see different mediums go through this life cycle at different times in history, because with each art or craft establishing themselves at different times, their lifespans differ. The First World War triggered the exponential rise of modernist art. In the same way, the quartz crisis triggered the rise of the integrated bracelet sports watch. But then for numerous reasons, art slipped into postmodernism after the Second World War, and for numerous different reasons, watches have continued to progress since Genta designed his masterpieces. And that is why Audemars Piguet continue to have their 10% share in Richard Mille. It's important, we were going to come back to that a bit. Richard Mille are different. They are a symbol of the new era of watchmaking, driven by the continued development of mechanical movements, a new set of buyers' tastes, but also a progression that AP's most successful form, the Royal Oak, simply can't allow. Because the integrated bracelet movement of watches is stuck in the past. AP struggled to launch a new watch that isn't a Royal Oak these days, and the Cubitus appears to have fallen on its face, for now at least. And this category has a pre-established mould of what it needs to be. Whereas Richard Mille, it's like AP's skunkworks in a way, pushing watchmaking forwards, trying new things. They see continued success and mass market awareness as a result. I'd argue they are the most influential on the mass market of the haute horology brands. Take an average man or woman off the street and ask them to point to a Lange, Moser, or Richard Mille, and I think the latter will have the highest success rate, even though most are 4 or 5 tax brackets below considering buying any of these brands. Whatever artistic or design philosophy we can prescribe to Richard Mille's watches, they most certainly do represent the next era of watch design, the successor to the integrated bracelet watch, which in my eyes means they're the most important watch of the 21st century. As ever though, there is a caveat to that. The most important watch for the uber-rich. In terms of greatest societal good, that title ought to go to Casio. Overall influence on design trends, maybe the Tudor Black Bay or PRX. But in terms of driving forward watch design, the Richard Mille is responsible. It is the billionaire's G-Shock, and that aesthetic has trickled down to more mainstream brands such as Zenith and Tag Heuer with their skeleton pieces, and now even Tissot with the Carbon PRX. So if we're saying that Richard Mille is the successor to the modernist watch, the integrated bracelet, logically it is the postmodern watch. But that doesn't mean it has been influenced by the work of Andy Warhol or even Tracy Emin, but mass consumerism. The literary critic Jameson, in his work on modernism and postmodernism, claims that we shift from a modernist society to a postmodern one when we move from parody to pastiche. So the move away from copying something for comedic sake to the endless reproduction of something for commercial gain. And by these terms, Richard Mille are a postmodern watchmaker. You may love these pieces, and I'm sorry for what I'm about to say, but these watches, especially the tonneau-cased models, are incredibly samey. They're different to previous watches from other brands, yes, but not different enough from themselves. They are endlessly reproduced for profit. So within Jameson's terms, a pastiche of themselves. That is their greatest strength, of course, if you want to flex your watch. But it's also a major weakness, as it's samey, and the market can only remain interested for so long. Their competing horology brands do not have this issue. Just look at the horological machines produced by MB&F. Each one is incredibly different and unique. Now returning to art, it is widely accepted that we have moved past modernism, and we have moved past the integrated bracelet watch for the most part, as the innovating force within watches at least. The powers of postmodernist artistic movements have been fading as well, as we've moved into more contemporary artistic groups. And maybe Richard Mille are fading as well. In the Morgan Stanley Watch Report between 2019 and 2024, they'd moved from 8th up to 6th, overtaking Longines. But will they usurp Patek and AP, who are 4th and 5th? Likely not. I struggle to see where they can go from here to increase their market share. They've pulled the same tricks as Rolex, and there are only so many people with Richard Mille money and tastes. It's quite hard to tell if a movement, a philosophy, or a brand is on the way out while you're in the midst of it, at least. And I think the contemporary flex watch is changing. And it's a little different to the Richard Mille. Perhaps if you're looking to the wrist of Mark Zuckerberg, you'd find the answer with his FP Journes. But that doesn't detract away from what makes the Richard Mille the most important watch of the 21st century. Those behind the brand have proven that they know what makes a watch brand grow and how to get the 1% to clamour for their product. That's genuine innovation, strong marketing to establish iconic status, a recognisable familial design, and that you need to make waves to get recognised. If you want to help me make more videos like this one, do consider becoming a channel member. You'll get an extra video a month and a few other perks. But if you want to see more of my work, do remember to like and subscribe before you go. It helps me out just that little bit. And until next time, bye-bye.